Hi, everybody. Welcome to Must See Monday, Spring Edition. We are part of the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism here at the Cronkite School. My name is Maud Beelman. I'm the Executive Editor and Director of the Howard Center. To my far left is...
Hi, folks. I'm Lauren Mucciolo. Is that on? There it is. Hi, I'm Lauren Mucciolo, and I'm the Executive Producer for the Howard Center.
I am Nicole Ludden. I'm a junior at Cronkite.
Is this on? Oh, I am Jose Ignacio Castañeda. I'm a junior at Cronkite.
Derek Hall, senior, graduating in May.
Mackenzie Schumann, senior, graduating in May as well.
So we're going to talk tonight about what is the Howard Center, what do we do, what our goals are. And some of our projects. So we've actually had a busy day at the Howard Center today. We released a major project that we had been working on for about the last 5 months. It was an investigation. If we could pull up the screen. It is an investigation into a unit of ICE called Homeland Security Investigations. And these are agents, federal agents, that have a very broad investigative mandate in this country. And they've been involved in some shootings around the country. We thought we'd spend a little bit of time talking about the project to give you a good idea of how the Howard Center works. The way this project got started was before even the Howard Center opened. I was here trying to find my way around the Cronkite School where I'd never been before. And I was looking for story ideas, and one of the faculty members came up to me and said, "Have you ever heard of federal shootings? Any kind of investigation into federal shootings similar to what we've seen with the police shootings of the Black Lives Matter movement?" And actually, I hadn't, and so I went looking, and it turns out not much had ever been done on the topic of federal shootings, and even less was really known about Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI. And so that's basically how the project got started. We did pretty good. Since about 10 o'clock this morning, the story has appeared in more than 40 publications across the country, and it's now crossed the Atlantic, and it's on the Financial Times website?
No, it's Smaller Finance.
Oh, Smaller Finance. Okay, across the pond. That's good. It's a multimedia project, so we have an online presentation, but we also did a documentary, a short-form documentary, and I thought maybe Lauren could talk a little bit about that before we start asking some of our student journalists to talk about what they did.
Yeah. So as we got to work on this project, we knew that we wanted to do it in multimedia. And so with the documentary, we thought, all right, well, we need to find people to help tell the story. And it actually proved to be quite challenging to identify people who are willing to talk about what happened. And that included folks who lived in the neighborhood, who were eyewitnesses to the scene. Some were still quite disturbed by what they saw and didn't feel comfortable talking about it with us. We had trouble getting any comment from the federal agency. There was a family of the shooting victim in Ahwatukee. We contacted her family, and they talked to us a little bit, but weren't comfortable appearing on camera. So we really struggled to figure out, how are we going to tell this story visually? It wasn't very clear who would be the people who could help tell the story, so we had to get creative. And so the first great windfall we got was that the Phoenix Police Department, which investigated the shooting, released what seemed to be their full investigative case file to us. And so that had quite a few multimedia components to it that we could use. So it had audio material from the police interviews with the federal agents who were involved in the shooting. It had included video interviews with the suspects involved, included audio of 911 calls, video of body cam that the police were wearing when they arrived at the crime scene. So once we started collecting all of that information, we knew that we could reconstruct the story of what happened that day by using these different media and putting those media together to weave that story together. And then we also collaborated with the graphics lab here at the Cronkite School, and they prepared amazing graphics for us to help kind of show some of the techniques and tactics that these agents used that then ended up turning into a pretty violent day. So it was a really interesting process because we had a lot of challenges that we had to overcome. But the students were really, really impressive in their ability to rise to the occasion and overcome and find creative solutions for that storytelling. And so our 11.5-minute documentary appears on the Cronkite News website. It's also hosted on the Arizona Republic website, which is also running the full story. And it also ran this evening and will again tonight at 10 p.m. on Arizona Horizons on Arizona PBS. So it's been getting a lot of pickup.
So I should have mentioned at the front end that the goal of the Howard Center is to pick topics that will have national resonance. And so when you do that, you're looking for something that you can tell locally, but that you can also expand out like ripples of a pond. And we found that this shooting that had happened in Ahwatukee was not an isolated incident. And so we went looking for other shootings as well. Lauren mentioned the public records. So public records are a key component of any investigative reporting project. And we were very fortunate in that the Phoenix Police Department basically gave us most everything that we asked for. The key to using public records laws to your advantage as journalists isn't so much just in filing them, but in litigating them. And by that I mean in pushing back when an agency says that you can't have something. And for that, we had the help of Greg Leslie and the First Amendment Law Clinic over at the law school. So there was a nice melding of students from two different parts of the university who collaborated, and they are still helping us fight for records that we still don't have. We were very successful in getting records at the state level, less so at the federal level. So with that as a backdrop, I thought it would be maybe informative for you guys to hear from the students about how they did what they did, what some of the obstacles were, or some of the successes. And I thought I'd start with Nicole. Can you tell us your experiences in trying to find people to talk about this?
Yeah, well, the subject in general is a lot of people didn't want to talk to us given the ICE doesn't release their federal officer-involved shooting data, so it was kind of from the beginning a hunt to find information wherever we could. Obviously, it started with this traumatic shooting in Ahwatukee where 4 people were injured and 1 person lost their life. And from there, we went to search on to see where this has happened other places. And we actually found more than 14 other shootings involving HSI. And from our reporting now, we know that it's probably a lot more than that. So our investigation kind of was scouring newspaper archives, sending out public information requests from the police departments where these shootings had taken place. Interviewing, reaching out to the people, the family of the person who was unfortunately deceased at this Ahwatukee shooting was actually something I was essentially involved in. And like Lauren said, they weren't very open to talking about the experiences, rightfully so. So it's always kind of a balancing act of the information you have and what you can do with it and what's the next step after that.
Can you just talk briefly about some of the sleuthing that you had to do on Facebook to try to find people who might be connected?
Yeah, so the deceased victim in the Ahwatukee shooting who was driving the car on the day of the shooting, her name was Teresa Medina Thomas, and we actually found her Facebook profile, which was still up, and we were able to find her siblings. She had a big family. She's from the Tonoho O'odham Reservation. So I actually reached out to her sister, to her, another colleague of ours reached out to her mother. In the Native community, it's not appropriate to talk about deaths so soon after they happen. They like to take a lot of time to mourn, which was something we figured out later on in the process. So while we figured out some initial information to be able to figure out Teresa's life, she left behind a 12-year-old daughter. She was a very central character in the family. We did get some preliminary information about what happened, and the mother wasn't aware what was going on. She didn't really know how to navigate the federal policing system. So we kind of got as much as we could from Facebook, just talking to these people until they didn't want to talk to us anymore.
So another big part of the investigation was simply trying to understand this agency called HSI that a lot of people didn't know about or had not ever heard of. Most of you have probably heard of ICE. ICE is basically an agency that is divided into divisions. It has two main divisions. One of them is HSI, and that's the one we were looking at. Derek, can you talk a little bit about what you had to do to try to figure out what this agency was and whether it had any problems?
Yeah, the agency has a carefully curated public image. So we got some surface information right up front just from their website. I mean, it's they employ more than 7,000 special agents. The agency bills itself as the largest investigative arm within the Department of Homeland Security, and it gives DHS its biggest presence internationally. So it's a big agency, and they enforce more than 400 criminal statutes related to immigration and customs. So to a certain degree, their investigative powers are unprecedented in that regard. And but to really dig in and learn about the agency, we had to push past that curated image that they put out there. And one of the ways we did that is by looking at the Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security. And we identified roughly 7 or 8 OIG reports that focused on either problems within DHS that were affecting HSI or problems with HSI directly. And as we started looking at those, we realized that since 2016, the OIG had identified problems with management and oversight of use of force within the Department of Homeland Security, as well as issues with training at ICE and Homeland Security investigations. So the OIG reports were key to us learning about the agency because, like you've already heard, I mean, they don't make any of their information public, and they've got a wall up. They release what they want to release and put this public image out there. But to get past that, I mean, we really had to go to these other reports.
And Mackenzie, after we got the case file from the Phoenix Police Department, we needed to make sense of it, and not only that case file, but some other information that we received. Can you talk about how we identified experts to help us?
Yeah. So we knew that we couldn't be the only ones talking about ICE, HSI, what was happening in the shootings, and so forth. So we knew that we had to find experts who obviously studied this, including everything from HSI itself to use of force to how guns are fired, everything in between, and like crime scenes and so forth. So one aspect that the Phoenix Police report, the Phoenix Police gave us in their report was actually like an audio recording of, it was a home surveillance system, like a Ring kind of system on their house. And it was about like a half-mile from the shooting. And in that recording, you could hear the entire duration of the shooting. And no other recording of the shooting was made. There were no body cams on the HSI agents. There was no nearby surveillance of like street lights or something like street light cams or anything like that. So as we were like listening to this this recording, it was just a lot of gunfire. It sounded crazy to me, but I had no idea what was going on. And so like the funny thing was that the week before I was an intern at the Republic last semester, and the week before I'd worked on a story and I interviewed a kid who could determine different cars based on the sound of their engines. And he was really talented and he loved cars. And so I kind of wondered, like, is this the same for people who are gun enthusiasts? Can they determine the different kind of guns if they hear a gun getting fired? And there are definitely experts where that is true. And so I worked on probably for like 2, 3, 4, I don't even know how long, a long time a couple months really, of finding the best experts in the nation for gunshot acoustic analysis. And so then after that, I came down to like 5, and then 2 were able to analyze the audio and essentially just...
Stop.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, can you find the file in the Cronkite News story? That's the,
Maybe.
it's going to be in chapter
It'll be in chapter
3,
3.
the shootout.
Yeah.
And if you scroll down, you'll see a graphic image that's going to look like squiggly lines.
Yeah, it's a video file.
I thought before Mackenzie got to the punchline, you could hear what she's talking about.
There it is.
Do you want to hit play on that?
Yeah, so essentially that is a segment of the file that we sent. The whole thing was about 20 minutes long of just white noise. And then that shooting happened in about 36 seconds, and there was over 100 bullets fired. So clearly anyone who's not a gunshot acoustic analysis expert can't really find the difference between what kind of guns are fired. So after they analyzed that audio for a few weeks, there was one man out of Montana State University, Rob Mayer, and then another man out of Austin, Texas, Stephen Beck. And they came to the conclusion essentially that the first gun to fire out of that audio clip was a handgun. And specifically, one expert, Stephen Beck, found it was a Sig Sauer pistol, which is one of the guns that the agents were carrying, which directly contradicted the official narrative that we found in court documents that the quote-unquote bad guy or the human smuggling suspect with the AK-47 fired first. So it showed us a different side, perhaps, of the official narrative, which I thought was interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a big startling moment for us all when Mackenzie came in and said they think it was a handgun. So with Ahwatukee as the backdrop, we had to find out whether it was an anomaly or whether it might be part of a pattern. And so we asked the students to try to see if they could find any other shootings involving HSI agents. And Jose, do you want to talk about the journey you went on?
So it was like me and Nicole and Mackenzie, and we all really worked on finding and researching all these other cases that happen across the country. And with each case, we kind of started either with like a media report or some other kind of surface level thing that said something about maybe a shooting, it involved federal agents, or it involved ICE. And then from there, we kind of made our way out. So with each case, it was kind of the starting point, and then with the information that we had, and then from there, we did try to identify every person that could be affected by that in any way and reach out to them or any source of information that they had. So in each thing, it was, reach out to the lawyers, reach out to the families, reach out, if we could, to people who were injured during these cases. But literally, community activists, anybody that could just kind of tell us what happened on that day, and kind of recreate the scene, because some of the news reports, you can't really get that from them. So we really had to piece together a lot of stuff from a bunch of different sources, documents, record requests, just talking to people, getting interviews with people. And yeah, it was tough sometimes, especially with some of the cases that were so long ago. I think Anaheim, which is the first recorded one, was 9 years ago? Yeah, so it was 8 to 9 years ago, and I talked to Federico Sire, and he was a lawyer for that Anaheim case they sued ICE, and he just told me stuff, but he was very quick-minded, and he knew oh yeah, we did this, and we did this, and we did this because they were completely in the wrong, and they should have never done this. But it was very hard to find people 8 years on that could remember that, especially lawyers or police or even records that weren't already expired that they could release to us or anything like that.
And just to be clear, we started with news reports about these shootings, but very often there were just maybe one isolated report, maybe by a television station, maybe by a small paper. But a case didn't make it into our story or into our set unless we had independent corroborating information, and that had to come from police files, court files, lawsuits, stuff like that. So if there were just media reports, we didn't count them. And in fact, we have cases that are in our files that we know of only from media reports, and we've not yet been able to get the corroborating information, so they're not in our count. So the point we make to people is this is at least how many we found. We believe there are more, and no one really knows because this information is not released publicly. You can imagine the pitfalls that might be involved in doing a story like this, right? Can you? It's like 1,000 points of possible mistakes. So we spent a lot of time on fact-checking. Could Nicole start us off talking about how we handled fact-checking?
Yeah, I was actually the designated fact checker on this assignment. I interned at the Republic as a fact checker for 2 semesters. And Mackenzie and I took on the feat of making 2 giant fact-checking binders. And for every shooting we had, every fact that we came across, there had to be documentation from an official source to prove that. And through taking this program and just investigative journalism in general, I really learned how important that is to this process. Just every little fact you have to have verification for. So yeah, that was a very long, tedious process that is still going on now, I'm sure, within the next investigations to come. But yeah, it was just a lot of court records, sifting through court records, and every fact you see up here in our reporting is CQ'd to some sort of document, police record, or other independent verification.
Do any of the other, you want to tell any fact-checking war stories?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of realized late in the game that we didn't do our fact-checking early enough. Because as we were writing our final copies, we realized that Maud wanted everything footnoted, and everything meant like every name, every date, every sentence, every fact, every quote, like everything under the sun. And so we had to go back and reread our copy like a dozen times and add footnotes to everything. And if there wasn't a footnote there, then either you're taking the sentence out or you're looking for that document or you're going to re-request documents. So it was a long process. I definitely learned that it's a very, very important process to get started on early in your reporting, just because we did find through later in the reporting that we hadn't fact-checked something thoroughly enough. So we would have to take that information out, or we had to go back and request documents, and which took more time and so forth. So that was a big learning process for me, for sure, but a good one.
Yeah, I mean, we had more than a few late nights, even here recently in this past week, and because everything that we said in the story, I mean, we needed to find an original document or some type of independent verification, and I don't think I've read any other story that I've ever worked on as many times as I've read this one. because every time we went through it and found something, we went back to the beginning and went through it line by line again. And I lost count of the number of times that we did that. But like I said, it led to more than a few late nights.
Yeah, just to add on to Mackenzie's point, I do think it was a lot. It's very tedious. I also, to Derek, yeah, I've never read the story so many times in my life, and one that I wrote especially. But like Mackenzie said, it was definitely a learning process, and through this program and through everything, you just really, really realize and materialize into yourself that it's every single line counts and everything counts, and you have to have everything fact-checked. And in the end, you have this story that you could show proudly and stuff, and you have everything backed up, which is a great feeling.
Lauren, you had some special challenges for the documentary beyond just who were we going to get to appear on camera, because there were certain ways that you had to tell the story that maybe were different from the ways we've handled it in digital. I'm thinking particularly of, was it Jay? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, two things really. One is, in telling this kind of story, we're looking for sources and we're looking for, different ways to come at the information that we have. So we had spoken to the family of the victim a little bit, as much as they were kind of willing to speak with us. We spoke to policing sources and experts who look at high-risk police maneuvers and tactics. But we also wanted to understand a little bit more about the suspects. And what was interesting about this case is that all the suspects involved were from the Tohono O'odham Nation, which is a Native American reservation that's situated in Arizona, on the border between Arizona and Mexico. So it really holds a unique position in that it has its own border with Mexico, its own border crossing. It has to deal with that sort of traffic back and forth. So, and that community, as many Native American communities are, deal with a lot of issues of poverty, unemployment, low education rates, and so forth. So we had a lot of trouble identifying somebody from the community who'd be willing to speak with us. So it was very, very challenging to do the reporting in that area. So finally we identified somebody who was a pastor and therefore had some sort of kind of community leader role in this community. His name was Jay Juan, and he agreed to do an on-camera interview at his home in Tucson. So the way that we were able to kind of get the suspects and kind of understand a little bit more about who they are and why they might have done what they did, we were able to film an interview with Jay Juan, and that actually is one of the distinguishing features between the documentary and the story that runs on the various websites, is that we were able also to include this information, this interview with Jay Juan, which was fascinating, and probably another story could be done just looking at that issue of how the cartels and how smugglers for drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and human smuggling, how they take advantage of the Native American communities on the border. So if anybody's looking for a topic for a story, that could be a pretty good one.
So the major takeaways from what we said so far, obviously, fact-checking is key. You can't have a story like this and get anything wrong, no matter how minor it is, because if you get anything wrong, it will be used to destroy or challenge the credibility of everything else that you did. And so while investigative reporting from the outside might seem like an exciting, challenging, death-defying type of journalism, it's really a lot of tedium and attention to detail and long nights with binders of papers. And then the other big takeaway is that when you're doing a multimedia investigation, you want to play to the strengths of each medium, and you don't want to have a cookie cutter approach so that every different piece of your project is like every other piece, just in a different medium. And so that's what we strove for in this project. Did I say it's on the New York Times and Washington Post sites right now? Have I said that yet? Okay. So we're real thrilled about that. Before we open it up to questions, because I'm sure you probably have a lot of them, I thought I wanted to just go down the line and have everybody talk about what their impression, what it was like working in the Howard Center, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you learned.
All right. It was, I mean, like you were saying earlier, it was a lot of long nights, big binders, lots of papers, a lot of staring at a computer, researching, a lot of just talking to people from across the country who didn't know who you were, didn't like the media, didn't understand why you were asking them why they're, like, what happened when their brother died a few years ago. Like, questions like that. It was a lot of hard work, but it also had a lot of, like, really rewarding moments where you would get the document you'd been waiting for 6 weeks for. You would get a response from a victim's family. You would find something new that you didn't know before. So it was grueling for sure at times, but definitely worth every day, every night, every weekend I spend in the center for sure.
Well, one of the things I love so much about the program is that it introduced me to elements of reporting that I had never been exposed to before, and even elements that I had done in reporting before this. It was like they were on steroids in the investigative project. So it's like exercising a muscle that I've never used before. So there's so many opportunities to learn for that reason in ways that I hadn't learned before this program. And but it also introduced a lot of challenges that were new as well. So if I had to pick one of the biggest challenges, it would be staying organized. I mean, we had so much information that even with our best efforts at reorganizing, it was just a constant battle throughout the whole project. And then when we got to the point of writing, that organization played a role as well. I mean, the challenges with organization and trying to organize everything that we discovered in the final product that we put out. But my favorite thing about the program is before going into the Howard Center, when people would ask me why did you choose to pursue journalism, like I couldn't fully answer that question, but I found out when I got into the Howard Center and did this type of reporting. And now that I've had that experience, I know why I'm doing this. I know why I chose to pursue this.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the biggest highlights of working in the Howard Center is working in a team, as we're here in the panel. It's all of us, or almost all of us. But I think working in a team is something new that I've never done before when I was reporting. I've always been reporting alone. So that was something new, and I think each one of the 8 students and Lauren and Maud who were in there, we all brought a different kind of skill to the Howard Center, and we all played very well off each other, and all those skills kind of combined to make this team that could produce this story. And like Joel was really good at talking to people, and he could get anybody to talk to him, and he's the one who kind of spoke to Teresa's mother, and she opened up to him, and everybody kind of had their own strengths, and that they all brought to the table, and together we all kind of made this great team that produced this story. And then, like Mackenzie said, it's kind of ups and downs throughout the semester. Some days are great, and then some days it's just staring at a computer, doing research, counting. I think one day I spent the entire day translating a transcript from me and Joel did from one of the police reports. And other days it's amazing, and you get this trove of documents, or you get your one key source to call you back, and then they tell you exactly what you needed to hear, or something like that. But it's, you got to take it as you go, and it's one of the most rewarding forms of journalism I've ever experienced.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the biggest challenge with doing this investigation this semester was getting people to talk to us. ICE is a very seclusive agency. They don't make this data public. We had to dig for it. With Teresa Medina Thomas's family being from a Native community, they weren't really apt to being open about what happened to their daughter. And we did get some information, and that information was super helpful for our investigation. But I would say the biggest challenge is getting these documents, ICE did not respond to us, but getting as much information as we could about an agency that little is known about. But I would say on the other hand, the most rewarding part of this was the people we did get to talk to. We got to canvass the Ahwatukee neighborhood where this happened. We got to talk to neighbors who heard this eruption of gunfire in a small retirement community, and they hit the floors of their garages, of their hallways. They called 911. It was a really scary experience for a lot of people, and I think that just adds to the importance of covering this type of situation. It's way bigger than just an officer-involved shooting. It's a federal agent-involved shooting, and these happen in our own neighborhoods. And I think most importantly, I think the glamour of investigative journalism is the power to affect change. And I think this story will definitely affect change. And being able to collaborate with such amazing people like Maud and Lauren and my colleagues was super rewarding. And I'm really excited to see where the reporting on this goes.
Thank you. Lauren, do you want to add anything?
I'd love to open it up to questions.
Okay, why don't we do that then? If you wouldn't mind, come stand at the center mic and come on, you must have questions. I know some of you out there. Who's going to be the brave one? Thank you, Molly.
So yeah, I was really, amazing work, first of all, congratulations. Really must be a very exciting time, and it's exciting now. My name is Molly, I'm currently in the Howard Center to kind of see it all come to fruition, so great job. My question is, so in the story, I was kind of struck by the fact that HSI doesn't often stick around, I guess, for the walkthrough afterwards. And I was just curious, I know that ICE and HSI didn't really talk to you guys very much, but were you able to get a sense of how often that happens and or why that is, why they don't stick around, why they jump to call 911 right after a shooting they're involved in?
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Molly. Yeah, so that was definitely a question we asked as well, and definitely a question that police were asking and Maricopa County attorneys were asking. There was one shooting in Mesa that the police in their police incident report were kind of asking the same question. They were like, wait a second, why are the agents going to the hospital when we've still got a dead body on the ground kind of thing? And why were the agents wandering around the scene freely? Because in any other shooting, the person, they would have been detained, they would have been brought aside. In Phoenix police shootings, the police are immediately brought to aside, either to a patrol vehicle or to a nearby room where they can sit and they get immediately debriefed. They are answering questions about what happened. Because there's a lot of research, and we didn't really include this in our report, but there's a lot of research that says that essentially as soon as an event happens, your memory of it starts to fade, which is pretty natural. And so it makes sense for police to stick around, answer questions immediately. And ICE didn't do this, and in the Mesa police incident report, it said that was policy. We never received any documents to corroborate that, but essentially in every single shooting that we found, the agents were interviewed at least 3 days after the shooting. And usually, I think in every shooting, they had their lawyers present as well. So whether or not that was policy is just essentially what happened in every shooting that we found.
And didn't you see examples of agents being taken to the hospital when they weren't injured?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was also in almost every single shooting. The agents were taken to the hospital either for high blood pressure. Some were minorly injured, hit by cars or whatever. So there were some instances where the hospital visit was certainly needed. Others where it was just their protocol perhaps to just be taken to the hospital immediately after to check for injuries or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I was just going to add that it did come up a lot in the documents that we were looking at, that suggesting that the agency has a policy that they automatically wait. I think it was 72 hours is what we saw over and over before they give a statement. And it was common for them to go to the hospital regardless of whether there were injuries. against the objections of the police officers that were investigating the shootings. And you can see, I mean, we analyzed video interviews that the police did of agents and witnesses and read through transcripts. And sometimes you could see the frustration with the local police officers that these agents handled it this way. And you could see it in their questioning. And our experts told us that, one, it goes against the types of reforms that have come about since Ferguson in local law enforcement, and it hinders any organization's ability to determine if these agents did anything wrong or to fully and confidently clear them of any wrongdoing, the way that they handled the investigations after the shooting.
I thought it was interesting, and maybe you guys can help refresh my memory, but the way that we even sort of started peeling back the layers of this was early on. Derek was looking at a court filing where the prosecutor in the Awatuki case down in Tucson was complaining that they couldn't move forward because they didn't have the police report yet. And they were complaining about the Phoenix police, and she kept talking about she needed the disclosure. She had, and she even threatened at one point to convene a grand jury to get the disclosure. And so we were all kind of wandering around going, what disclosure are they talking about? And Mackenzie found
Oh, that was the police incident report?
those were the MCAO letters.
Yeah, and the MCAO letters, yeah.
And so those were the letters from the county prosecutor, and they were very helpful for us because up until this point, it was just us saying, gee, this is weird the way this is happening. But when Mackenzie developed this source who sent her these letters that the Maricopa County attorney had sent to HSI complaining about their failure to follow protocol, we realized that we weren't the only ones who were asking questions about what had happened. And in fact, the top prosecutor for the region was challenging this federal agency over what they had and had not been doing. How did you get that?
The letters?
Mm-hmm.
That was simply a Google search to see what the local use of force policies were. Because I kind of wondered, that's when we were looking into ICE's use of force, and we were wondering, like, are there any local guidelines for this? And so I think, I don't know if my memory serves me right, but I think it was just a Google search of, like, Maricopa County use of force policy, just to see if there's anything, Mesa Police, Phoenix Police. And it ended up being a Maricopa County Attorney's Office use of force guidelines, or not guidelines, but use of force like protocol that they follow. So after every incident, whether it be local or federal police, they don't have to, but it's their protocol to immediately be called out to the scene. They investigate, they send one of their investigators out, and they're essentially there along with the police for every step of their investigation. And so on their website, they had essentially like a spreadsheet of just all the officer-involved shootings that had happened. And in those, I found the 4 that had happened, or the 5 that had happened in Maricopa County. And I just essentially like called the PIO. By then, we had been talking a little bit already. And I just asked her for general information about use of force, their policy, and so forth. And then one thing led to another, and she kind of like told me that they had these letters that they wrote, and so I just asked her, can you send me everything that the Maricopa County's Attorney's Office would have on this shooting, other than the police reports that we already had? And so those were those letters, and they were pretty revealing of how it was this like systematic problem within Maricopa County, essentially, of how the federal officers, weren't following the Maricopa County Attorney's Office use of force policy.
So in every investigation, there's usually an aha moment when you think, okay, we're making progress. And I remember when you got those letters, I thought, we are making progress on this. Can we take another question? Please, to the mic.
You guys clearly did a really good job on all this reporting. I'm curious, what was the difficulty in staying objective once you guys started realizing about ICE and HSI and their failing to follow protocol?
Can you ask that again? I'm sorry. Yeah.
How were you guys able to stay objective in some of the reporting once you started to learn about some of the failures to follow protocol by HSI and ICE?
Yeah, I think that was one of the benefits of working with a team. You know, is every time we made a discovery, not just when we made a discovery, but every single time we made a discovery, we all came together and discussed it. And having other reporters there and good editors to bring you back in line, I think was important, because it's a good question, because I think it's easy to do that. You know, it's easy to look at this. There's excitement. You want to discover the types of things we were discovering, and when you do discover it, you think this is huge. You know, I want to tell everybody about this. So it's easy to slip out of that. But for me, at least, it was having a team, such a great team, and coming together and approaching all of these different discoveries as a team is what helped me stay in line.
Yeah, and we also reached out to ICE several times. We tried to get HSI's perspective on this, and they rejected to comment, which is their prerogative. But we actually reached out to a former HSI agent. His name is slipping my mind right now, but we had an extensive Skype call with him, and he gave us his point of view. He said what their typical protocol is, and he was kind of familiar with this Ahwatukee shooting, but kind of just gave us a rundown of their point of view, and we do include that in our coverage. We do seek out those point of views from them as well.
Like Derek said, I do think it was really beneficial to have like a team of reporters there and editors that really keep you grounded whenever you find something new, a new discovery or something like that. But I do think one of the big moments for me that did kind of pull me back and like pull me back and be like, okay, like we have to be as objective as we can in this reporting, was that interview. It was Larry Cosme, and he's the president of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, and he's a former HSI agent. And we talked to him for about like an hour, 2 hours, a long time one morning, and that kind of helped me kind of step aside and look at all the reporting we've done, and then get both sides and kind of, you know, give it a fresh look with their perspective and our perspective, and kind of then start writing and give it a fair, objective kind of take on our story, so it wasn't too radicalized, and we had both sides. And I think that interview really helped in giving us the other side of the story and giving it the most objective view that we could.
Yeah, and essentially, we weren't trying to put any opinions. That's not really what our journalism is about. But we were just reporting on facts that we didn't know before, so we certainly got surprised by like over 100 shots were fired, but also 20 of those were from the suspect firing his AK-47. So it was like none of what we found was us trying to say these agents are bad. That was not our prerogative. We were looking for facts about shootings that had happened around the country, and whether they were following protocols that other police officers usually followed, or if they were following best practices or common things. We were kind of just, that was just a question in the back of our mind. But through our reporting, we were just looking for uncovering shootings that had never been nationally reported before, and never really been investigated before, and beyond just breaking news stories. So, yeah.
One of the many differences between investigative reporting and general or spot reporting is because you have the luxury of time, you have a greater responsibility to not only get the story right, but to tell it from all the perspectives. And so even if somebody doesn't want to speak up on their behalf, you have to go the extra mile to find somebody who will speak up on their behalf, because you can't just say, oh, no comment and move on. You know, with great freedom comes great responsibility. And so they worked really hard to try to identify somebody who could speak on behalf of the agents, and that turned out to be the Federal Union of Agents. And also, Jose probably had 20,000 text exchanges with one of the lead lawyers.
Yeah. So his name was also Larry, and throughout the semester, I wish I could catalog it. I should do it. I think I called him 1,000 times maybe. He would always put me off. He'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna get on a flight, don't worry about it. Like, I'll call you later. And I would be like, okay, cool. But he would never call me back. So I called him, I think, twice a day, especially towards the end of the semester. I called him twice a day, every day, until he would pick up or until he would text me, and I would email him and text him and call him. And, you just gotta find ways to get that perspective. And for the beginning, that's who he was, so you just got to keep going, got to be persistent, and yeah.
Yeah, Jose brings up a really great point, persistence. This is a really important thing for us as investigative journalists. If somebody doesn't answer the phone, somebody doesn't get back to your first email, that doesn't mean you stop trying. You keep going, and you go to the point where you're kind of annoying. But it's required, and by doing that, I think that's how we got the sources that we did.
I think he did say one thing finally to you, right?
I think it was, did he say it to you, Mackenzie?
Oh,
to
the
me.
last time I called him, he hung up and said, "Oh, not you guys again." He just hung up.
Yeah, I think
Not you guys again.
he was tired of us. He was like, I don't got time for you guys. Just stop calling me. But yeah, every single time. I don't know how many voicemails he had in his voice box, but I left him a voicemail every single time I called him. Just like, hey, call him back. And he would never respond.
Can we get another question from the audience?
Hi, guys. Seeing what you did is so impressive. I mean, I came across the country to work in the Howard Center, and you're making it look like so amazing, and I can't wait to get going. Talking about organization, how did you organize this? Because I'm working on projects that are much smaller, and I'm already, thinking about these and wrestling with these issues. So, how did you? So, I imagine you had paper documents and computer documents. And how did you do it?
Yeah, so a lot of both. Google Drive was our best friend throughout this. We had folders that pertained to every single subject, every single source, and we dumped those files in so that everyone had access to them. We footnoted everything. Footnoting is super important within our copies. And we also, like I was saying earlier, we had fact check binders. So every court document, every transcribed interview, newspaper archive was in a document in a big binder that came up chronologically when it comes up in the story, so that we had something to point to for every fact within the story. So this binder in itself, towards the end, was a big key part of organizing all this information we had aggregated over the semester.
Nicole was really the organization guru for the project, and it required, like she said, we set up a shared Google Drive that the entire team joined, but that drive had to be reorganized probably almost on a weekly basis, because after we would get another round of documents, suddenly the organizational system that made sense 2 weeks ago didn't make sense anymore, and so we had to go back in. That also was very, very relevant to making the documentary. So for those of you who work in video format, you know the importance of organizing your footage so that when you go into an edit, you're able to find everything in a way that makes sense. You're not wasting time trying to dig through and find things. So we tried to set up some systems for organizing that footage very, very early on, so that when we went into the edit, we knew that things were organized in a way that there was a system behind it.
And go ahead, Derek.
I was just going to say we had a challenge that's unique to doing the investigation as students, in that because of our class schedules, there were different groups on different days. So that created a challenge with organization that probably isn't typically there. And so it was really important to have somebody like Nicole that halfway through could go in and reorganize everything. And then towards the end, we created fact check binders, both digitally and physically.
And so the other key to organization is it goes beyond physical organization, and that is sort of the logical mental organization of what you're doing. And so Lauren and I had daily and sometimes several times daily conversations with the people in the class about, okay, where are you now? What do you know now that you didn't know 3 hours ago? We ended every day with having the students do what we called Handover Memos. We had to create that mechanism because we had different people on different days. But to do a project like this, you have to keep the train moving down the track, and that has to happen regardless of whether you've got a Monday, Wednesday group or a Tuesday, Thursday group. And so having to do those handover memos before, that was the last thing everybody had to do. It was a group Google document. That was the last thing everybody had to do before they walked out the door. And then I think as the semester went on, everybody got wise to the idea that they could actually start their handover memos early in the day, so they weren't scrambling toward the end. But I think a big part of the organization challenge is logical thinking. And so we're always asking questions of, what is it you're trying to get with this question? What is it you're trying to get with this interview? What is it we're trying to answer with this data set? What kind of document are we looking for? So it's a combination of a physical practice of organizing your material and sort of an intellectual, logical practice of constantly asking yourself, what is it we're doing? Why are we doing this, and is there a better way to do it? Another question?
Hi, my name's Helen. I'm also greatly looking forward to joining the Howard Center. But I was curious, it sounds like, I mean, ICE and or HSI did a good job of shutting you guys out, but were there other, and so maybe you didn't have the confrontation that I'm about to ask about, but I'm curious whether there were some high-stakes interviews during your reporting, or like moments that come to mind where you felt like you were dealing with a source who might try to contradict the narrative that you had discovered and were in the process of proving to be true.
I would say probably the interview with Larry Cosme. You want to talk about that, Jose?
Yeah, well, with Larry Cosme, yeah, and we did it. It was me, Nicole, Lauren, and Mackenzie, and we all sat in one of those little edit bays up in Cronkite News, and we Skyped him. And he was definitely our confrontational interview that you would have in every investigation. And we just posed to him the questions that we've been wondering the entire semester. And we posed to him the questions that we posed to ICE and to HSI. And he kind of gave us a runaround. He would give us a lot of like long, folksy kind of answers that didn't really answer our question. So I think it was very important to be prepared. One is you have to have the questions in the perfect order and how you want to ask them, what you want to ask. Like Maud said, like, what are you trying to get with this interview, with this question? Why are you putting it here? Through that, and then also I think it helped a lot to have multiple reporters on it. That way, like, somebody could ask one question, and then somebody could come in with like a bigger, more like hard-hitting question, and then we could go back and do that, and that way it was all of us, and we were all organized and prepared, and we had researched everything, and I think that really helped with the interview to kind of get answers to some of the questions that we were wondering throughout the entire semester.
Yeah, and to add on to that, there was one instance. So we were looking into obviously multiple shootings. One shooting we found in Dumfries, Virginia, and turns out the public records law in Virginia is a little bit unique, and only Virginia residents can request records there. So we had to there was luckily a Cronkite News student who was working in the DC bureau at the time who was living in Virginia. So we had to work through that, and a lot of those phone calls to the police were, as I know, like very confrontational. They were like, why can't we get these records? They're public. But a lot of it was just working around like, oh, okay, so if you need someone in Virginia, we've got somebody in Virginia. And then also just, I think like just figuring out how to get around like, to be able to get the records that people didn't want to give us was hard sometimes. And a lot of times it was just emailing over and over and over again, or calling over and over again, or sending a public records request and then sending a follow-up public records request, essentially. So it was a lot of that, just essentially keeping on people's tails, a lot of that.
And there were other kinds of difficult interviews that were short of confrontational. So we dealt with a lot of experts, ballistics experts, toxicology experts, and policing experts. And when you deal with experts at this level, you have to go into the conversation having done a high degree of homework. Otherwise, they're not going to spend time talking to you because they're at that high of a level, and it will waste their time. Derek, you had an experience with Dr. Alpert.
Yeah. So one of the issues that we ran into in talking to experts at all is that we touched on an issue with federal use of force that no one had looked at. So when we approached use of force experts, telling them that we wanted to talk to them about federal use of force, they immediately put up a wall and said, I don't know anything about federal use of force, I'm not going to talk about that. And so it took multiple calls trying to come together and think about how do we reapproach these use of force experts. Professor Alpert, Dr. Alpert, was he's just a straightforward, blunt guy, and it took going to him at first and just right up front explaining what we were trying to do in a quick, concise way. And then during the interview, it started out confrontational for the reasons that I just explained. And as he started to see that the amount of work that we had done and what we had learned and what we already knew about the subject that he was an expert in, those walls started to come down. And it was, so for him, I think it was being able to show him the work that our team had done and what we had discovered. And when he saw that he didn't have to do the work for us and that we were actually investigating an issue that he also believed needed to be investigated, it started to bring down the walls that he had up.
So we're almost out of time, but I thought I would ask each of them, or whoever wants to, if you had one piece of advice for somebody who's thinking of going into investigative journalism or going into the Howard Center, what would it be?
For me, it goes back on organization. A lot of days I would sit in front of this computer looking at the handover memo and just like have no idea what I did that day because I did so much that day. So a lot of what I learned and a lot of like what I would suggest is just if you're working on a story, write a memo for everything you do, every email you send, every phone call you make, every interview you do. Like write something on it, at least like have a checklist, say I emailed this person at 12:01 p.m. and then I called this person at 12:15, they didn't answer, I left a voicemail, this is what my voicemail said. Even to that detail, like I now try to do that as much as I can, and it's very helpful, especially in bigger pieces.
Yeah, I would say start organizing and getting like serious and obsessive about the way that you organize in your reporting as soon as possible. No matter what kind of story you're working on, start really working that muscle and developing that skill. And this investigation, I mean, it kind of takes over your life a little bit. And so I think the other piece of advice for me would be just to make sure that is something that you want to do, because it's the work that we did in this past semester was so important, but it is also kind of all-consuming.
One skill that I think that I would give as advice to anybody who wants to join the Howard Center is kind of the skill to think outside of the box. In investigative journalism, and especially in our investigation, we hit a lot of walls with public records requests, with getting people to talk to us. So I think having the skill to just think of different ways to get the same information, or maybe even better information, that's going to come in handy when you're doing investigative journalism.
Yeah, I would say the biggest takeaway I learned from the Howard Center this past semester was persistence. Especially in controversial topics like this, people are going to say no to you more often than they say yes. But don't be afraid to be annoying. Don't be afraid to leave them a voicemail, call them excessive amounts of times, email them, email their family members if it comes to that. It's important to make contact on these type of things because that's how we build the story around people. So I would say the most important thing definitely is, in addition to organization and being able to think creatively, don't be afraid to keep pushing people even if you think you're being annoying, because ultimately you're going to get really great material from those people that you pushed.
And I know some advice that Maud and I tried to impart on the students is that when you're dealing with difficult topics like this, where there's tragedy involved and folks who you may be speaking to have experienced some kind of trauma, you kind of need to take care of yourself as well through that process. So my advice to you guys is to keep that in mind when you work on big projects, and especially when you're working on projects where there is some kind of tragic element. You may be coming across graphic photos from a police incident report, or speaking to a victim's mother who's dealing with, having lost their daughter and doesn't, are never going to get the answers they're looking. So those are hard spaces to navigate, and it's important to check in with each other. And I think that's one of the benefits of working with a team, is that not only could we rely on each other for our reporting, but we could also rely on each other for our mental health and do little mental health check-ins with each other to make sure we were all getting through it okay. And that's not just with the aspects of the project that are tragic. It's also just keeping the pace and being able to just deal with the amount of reporting and research and work you're doing, and making sense and getting to those points where you feel lost because you found so much stuff and you just are so overwhelmed you just don't even know how to make sense of it anymore. We really try to take care of each other through that process. So it's something to really keep in mind when you're working on major investigations.
And caffeine and chocolate help too. So that's it, everybody. Thank you for coming.